Hi, everyone. Welcome to this special episode of The Bitey End of the Dog, where we're going to be talking about a very concerning issue that's happening in India right now, where we're seeing the mass proposed Roundup and even starting some of this Roundup and awful outcomes for our free living dog friends that are there. And I've got the amazing Sindhoor Pangal here with us, who's going to be talking us through the issues, as well as what we can do to help this situation. Let me tell you a little bit about Sindhoor, who is a canine behavior consultant, a canine myotherapist, an anthrozoologist, and an engineer by qualification. She researches free living dogs in Bangalore, India. She has presented her findings at major international conferences in the US, UK, and has conducted seminars in Europe, UK, and South America. She has been invited as an expert on several podcasts, including a few on NPR radio. She maintained a weekly column on dog behavior in the Bangalore Mirror for 2 years. She is a TEDx speaker, the author of the book Dog Knows. National Geographic calls her a great mind in the bookazine Genius of Dogs. She is currently the principal and director of Barks, that's BHARCS. And Barks offers a unique UK-accredited Level 4 diploma on canine sociopsychology and applied ethology. So we certainly have an expert that knows what she's talking about when it comes to this matter. So welcome to the show, Sindhoor.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike. I know that this is a sudden request, but it's a burning issue, and I really look forward to talking about it. I'm so grateful for this opportunity.
Yes. Thank you so much for being on. And it really is a pressing issue because we're talking about 60 to 100 million free living dogs in India, and the potential for such harm to happen to not only dogs, but the people that they share their lives with. So can we start with, just for the listeners, helping us understand, how did this all come about? How did this all start? And what was the big push for this initiative to round up all these dogs and put them in shelters or make them see much more unfortunate outcomes?
Yeah. So just to give everybody a little bit of context on India and its relationship with free living dogs, India has had free living dogs for a very long time. We have lived this way for as long as memory serves us. In fact, even our mythology that dates back thousands of years talks about free living dogs, and for the longest of time our constitution has protected them, and it was a mandate in India after the British Raj. The British Raj, we were colonized, and during the British Raj, dogs were being picked up and culled for reasons that has to do with colonization, and we won't get into that. It's a whole topic. But once we won our freedom, there were cases made and data shown to the Indian government to say that this kind of removal of dogs and removing them and culling them was not really helping anyone, not just the dogs, but even the humans. Rabies and bite risk was not really decreasing. Dog population wasn't decreasing. And so animal birth control, which we abbreviate to ABC, and anti-rabies vaccine, which we abbreviate to ARV. So ABC-ARV was proposed as the sensible, humane, effective solution in India, and which went on to. So this was gift by India, and I feel so sad to think that today that's being threatened in India, because this was proposed in India, in South India, to the Madras Corporation with 30 years of data, and it then went on to become the WHO recommendation worldwide on how to deal with free living dogs and the potential zoonotic diseases, particularly rabies, and reduce human-animal conflict in terms of bites. So this was the climate that we lived in until August last year. There were efforts to do ABC-ARV across the country. Some parts of the country had done much better than the others, showing tremendous results with extraordinary reduction in rabies and bites. but not all parts of the country were following it. India has very poor track record of implementation of a lot of things, good ideas, but not done right. And then in August, and I think many of your listeners, and you'll be able to relate to this, we have entered a day and age where science seems to take a backseat and poor media reporting seems to take the front seat. So in August, the highest court of India, so a few judges from the highest court of India, which is the Supreme Court of India, decided to act on a erroneous media report about a child having died of rabies, and decided to act on this and say, you know what, we need to remove all dogs from certain parts of New Delhi, institutional parts and government offices and so on and so forth, and move them all into shelters. And there came a pushback to that, saying that that doesn't make any sense. We don't have shelters because we have anywhere between 60 to 100 million dogs in this country. Each large city could have approximately, say, about 1 million dogs. And so putting them in shelters, even putting 10% of them in shelters is just not viable. And so there was a pushback. And we expected them to see sense in that it made no fiscal sense. We don't have the ability to carry out this order. But they really doubled down on it. And in November, they kind of expanded that to the entire country, saying, you know what, we need to do this across the country. We need to remove the dogs. The case is still under hearing. We have a hearing on the 28th of January, and we expect that this is going to continue for a little bit longer. But the reason I kind of reached out to you and I reach out to the global community is that while this is in court, people have been taking matters into their own hands. States have been taking matters into their own hands. Small municipalities and cities and towns are beginning to act on this, and they're beginning to pick up the dogs with nowhere for them to go. And so that really is the burning issue. And the other burning issue that we can get into a little bit more is that, like I said, we have achieved great strides in the last 20 years, 2 decades of hard-won victories of reducing rabies, reducing bites, and all of that is going to come undone by removing these dogs. And then the last thing that I also want to kind of discuss is the immense increased risk public health in terms of an epidemic risk, which could even expand to a pandemic risk at some point. And so these are all things that we should be talking about.
Yeah, so it sounds like it came out of a lot, like what happens in a lot of these situations. This is mass hysteria from maybe just one case or a handful of cases, which doesn't line up with the data. And speaking of which, why do you think that maybe they're not looking at history, right? So they say, history repeats. And so we've seen these attempts at mass culling or roundups in other countries as well. And if you look at some of the data or statistics, Bulgaria is one of those countries, Romania, Russia have tried, Turkey even has tried these type of campaigns where it's rounding up the dogs or putting them somewhere, and we see an increase in all of the issues they're trying to resolve. And since this is an aggression podcast, we can certainly talk about that as well, the bites and the increase in aggression and changes in behavior as we go along in the show. But why do you think there's sort of this ignorance of the data and what's happened, not only in India and as a representation of what works and what doesn't, but other countries? And we have to be concerned about how other countries might see this hysteria and say, oh, maybe we should look at doing the same in ours because there's supposedly this problem, but nobody's looking at the data on what's been tried. What do you think's going on there?
So I think it may be for the same reasons that most of our politicians across the world and people in power seem to be following suit on this, which is ignoring the science in favor of their personal beliefs. And I think this is not, it's about personality issues, really. I think that's what it's coming down to, which is not the way governance should be. It should not be about personality issues. It should not be about your beliefs. You don't like dogs and you're sitting in the highest court of the country. You can't flex your power to say, I don't like them, so I'd like to see them removed, and I don't care for the science of it. But I think that's what it is, because towards the end of last year and early this year, our lawyers have been presenting the science to the court. So we've had all of the best lawyers in India, making excellent arguments, working closely with the scientists. I've been in touch with many of them to say, look, this is not just a passion-based argument. This is not a love-based argument, although there should be room for those kind of arguments. Nobody questions when there's a hate-based argument, but when you make a love-based argument, there are, big red flags all over. But we're refraining from that and saying, look, we still need to look at the science of it, because India has tried culling for more than 100 years, and we have data to show that this does not work in our favor. But there has just been a complete disregard for it, almost a disdain for it, a disdain for science. And I think this is almost, you're probably facing similar questions. I think our power structures are showing their cracks, right? Where it's failing. And this is really a bigger conversation. It's quite scary. So some of the arguments that we have made is about the science and about the dogs and the bites and rabies and zoonosis and public health. But some of the other arguments that our lawyers have also made is about the legal systems being bypassed, the financial feasibility of this. So there are a lot of other questions also that come up here. It's not just about dogs. And I think you'll see the parallels there, right?
Yeah. Yes. Speaking of the financial aspect, I can't imagine, if you see the shelters here in the States, you see how full it can feel when it's just 100 dogs or 200 dogs, and the immense labor that's involved in just handling that many dogs. And then you just multiply that exponentially. I mean, 60 million dogs, even 10% of that, where do you put that many dogs? How do you do it efficiently? How do you do that when you're thinking about welfare? I mean, it's just an impossible task in my mind. So I can see that. I just don't understand how they can think it's possible to house that many dogs in any circumstance, or even round up that many dogs. I mean, if you multiply that, if you look at those numbers, but So it's not just the welfare issues and doing it efficiently and so on and so forth, right? I mean, you bring up that aspect of it, and as dog people and dog lovers, that kind of comes to mind. The first thing that comes to mind. Of course, there is the practical aspect of it, which is that we don't even have shelters to put them in. We don't have the necessary shelters. Yeah. And if you're going to put money into building these shelters, we've done the math on that. The cost is so high to do that in a country like India, it begs the question, why don't you use that money then to feed the people of India who don't have food? Why don't you use it to fix the air quality in the national capital of the country, which is a joke at this point? So there is that. And then there is a third angle, which is when you house so many animals in a high density environment like that, it creates a hotbed for diseases. So we need strict protocols on quarantining and, the worker protocols, which doesn't exist in India. And if those diseases are zoonotic diseases, meaning they are diseases that can pass on to human beings, that is extremely dangerous. Now, the other dangerous angle that comes into play there is also India is also now being reported as having an extremely high antibiotic resistance amongst the human beings, which means that we incubate superbugs. And so we are likely to create a high intensity epidemic risk. And given the climate change disasters that we are seeing, with the kind of floods that we are seeing, it creates a hotbed for epidemics to start out. And the worst part of this is if it's an epidemic with a novel virus. Rabies is a known virus. We have post-exposure prophylaxis, pre and post-exposure. We know how to deal with this. But if it's a novel virus, the last time we had a novel zoonotic virus come in, that was COVID, right? Yeah. Because we don't know how to deal with this. We have to rapidly understand this bug and develop
antidotes for it, and so on and so forth. And that is a risk that we do not want to take, and which is also why I come here calling to the global community, because given all these conditions, these constellations, everything that has come together, we are putting not only public health of Indians at risk, but public health of the world at risk by doing this.
So let's dive deeper into that. Let's continue with the issues, and then we're going to get into the behavior issues that we see and the welfare concerns. But let's kind of talk more about the rabies. You're talking about herd immunity, the vacuum effect, with a lot of different ways we can go with that. But let's talk about that first. Actually, the vacuum effect, what that is, and why that happens when there's this proposed plan, something like this.
Sure. So every ecosystem has the ability to support a certain amount of life, and that's the nature of an ecosystem. And if you suddenly remove a bunch of living beings from that ecosystem, you create a vacuum effect there. And immediately, and this is the beauty of life, I suppose, is immediately life moves in to occupy that space. Now, what kind of life moves in to occupy that space? There are three things that we're really concerned about. One is immediately we see an increase of scavengers. So scavengers, competing scavengers would be, for instance, rats or mongooses, snakes, so on and so forth. And they're going to come in. And now you can't really be catching rats and vaccinating them and creating herd immunity amongst them. I mean, you guys know the struggles you've had in New York with rats, right? It's not funny at all. It's a nightmare. And this is in a country like the US. In a country like India, where we have such a severe garbage problem and we don't know how to deal with this is going to turn into a nightmare very quickly. Or for that matter, snakes. We have a lot of venomous snakes in this country, and snake bite is one of the big concerns of this country. And rats. Dogs can't come up to the 13th floor and, enter your house, but rats can climb up the drain and come straight up, right? And so they can bring these diseases straight to us. And again, I want and remind everyone that the last pandemic we had came from a rodent. They were bats. Bats are also rodents, right? So rodents carry zoonotic diseases. They're mammals. They carry diseases that they can transmit to us. Rats carry leptospirosis and plague. And we have had outbreaks of plague in the past in India, where they've had mass culling of dogs. And so that is the immediate risk that we put our population under, and that's a health risk. The second risk that we have is India is also an extremely biodiverse country, and so we have a lot of other animals as well. Like, for instance, Bangalore city has seen panthers. In other parts of the country, there have been langurs and bears and even tigers. I mean, I was visiting my friend in the Nilgiris, and she points at the golf course and she says, they don't talk about a dog menace anymore, but they talk about monkey menace, bear menace, panther menace. And then she points at a golf course and she says, in this golf course, we have a tiger menace. I mean, come on, right? So when we talk about human-animal conflict, and if you're not able to deal with dogs, best of luck dealing with tigers. As everyday citizens, we don't have the wherewithal to deal with these things. We don't know how to deal with it. So when I ask her, what do you guys do? She talks about this with such dismay, because people don't know what to do about these things. And we don't, in India, it's not legal to shoot these animals and carry arms and shoot them. So what exactly are you going to do? And with wildlife, again, we risk zoonotic diseases and novel diseases, because our species have not been in contact with each other. They're not meant to be in such close proximity. So not only do they bring in diseases to us that we have not had exposure to in the past, we don't know what exists out there, but the reverse is true as well. We are giving them diseases through our livestock and our garbage. And I think, for instance, Robert Sapolsky documents baboons having died after exposure to human garbage, because animals, wild animals, when they come in contact with human beings, they very quickly discover sugar. That's the problem, right? And as soon as you discover sugar is it's a whole other thing. So they get quite addicted to our garbage, and they're back there very regularly. It's easy prey for them, and they get exposed to diseases that they should not be exposed to. And then finally, eventually the dogs come back. they reproduce, and that's what you mentioned. So cases in Russia and things like that show us that this is again beauty of nature. When you put a population under pressure, they compensate for it by reproducing faster. Litter sizes can get bigger. And so their numbers are increased, and they come back usually in twice the number that was what we had earlier. So we would have stabilized the population with birth control and made the population healthy with rabies vaccine and got 70% herd immunity. Now, that is the number, that is the golden number for us, because that's the number at which we kind of can stop the spread of these diseases and stop it from becoming an epidemic within the population. So it takes a lot to stabilize the population, sterilize all of them, vaccinate, keep track of it, and get them up to 70%. Now, if you remove that and then a new population comes in, they're non-sterilized, they're non-vaccinated, they not only bring disease risk with them, especially for the context of this podcast, what's also significant is they bring with them bite risk. Bite risk and human-animal conflict risk goes up significantly, because now here you have a new set of dogs completely dysregulated because they're in new territory. They're trying to figure out how to work with the other dogs that exist there, which is often a lot of friction. They're trying to understand the people around there. They've not gotten to know them. So there's again a lot of friction. They have also witnessed, this is a next generation that has witnessed the previous generation being treated very poorly by human beings. So they come in with a high degree of wariness. They come in with a lot of fear, and we know that fear leads to bites. So there is conflict between them, which then spills over to conflict with human beings. And that is the reason why we did not see bites and rabies decrease in India as long as we were removing them. And it's only in the last 2 decades when we started stabilizing them, keeping them there, making them healthier, did we see more than a 70% drop in rabies and more than a 50% drop in dog bites. And that's because of the slow work that we have done with sort of calming them.
Yes, I want to definitely dive deeper into that. I just want to back up for a second, a clarification question for some of the listeners that may not know. So when we're talking about the problem with the rats, and if you remove a good percentage of the dogs, the rat population increases, sometimes explodes. What are the reasons for that? Is it competition because there's less resources available, or is it more the dogs controlling the rat population? Or can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's a two-pronged thing, really. With dogs, so the big part of the problem in India is that we do not have a system for garbage clearance, and so we are struggling with garbage. There's garbage everywhere. Now, that is what creates what is called the holding capacity of the ecosystem. The ability to support life in urban spaces is coming from our garbage. And dogs have always thrived in that space, kind of. Dogs have been historically scavengers, and they evolved to take care of that aspect of human life. Now, they not only clear the garbage, and thus they're kind of creating competition for the rats by consuming the food that is available, but they also tend to hunt them and kind of thus keep the population in check. So with dogs gone, there's no more competition, no more predator, and lots of food available.
Okay, makes sense. And so now let's get into the behavior aspect, right? So, it's something obviously very important to me and many of the listeners to the show, thinking about how aggression manifests and how it develops. And you mentioned an increase in aggression when we see these efforts or these sort of initiatives put into place, and the problems with it. So let's kind of just take a step back and look at the, free roaming dogs or streeties and their social structure and the stability of that and sort of the groups they form loosely. Let's start with that. And then we'll get into what can happen when we disrupt that and all the other things we were just talking about. So start with that.
Yeah. So this is it's actually a very interesting conversation for especially professionals all over the world, because typically I think people look at dog aggression and think of dealing with it by training them. And here is a scenario where we're looking at 60 million dogs. They're free living dogs. There's no training that's going to be possible. You go to a streetie and say, hey, if you behave the way, let's say that you want to do positive reinforcement training, and you say, you behave the way I'd like you to, then I'm going to give you a treat. The dog is going to say, if you're not going to give me the treat, I'm going to go dig in the garbage. I don't need to wait around for you to reward me. I don't need rewards from you. I have a free life. So training is really out of the picture with them. And so how do we manage bites? How does conflict resolution really happen? I think understanding that is critical. And so big part of that is understanding the natural history of these dogs. Dogs are very unique creatures in that they evolved to coexist with us. They evolved to understand us really well. There was a very interesting convening that I was part of where there was a human doctor there talking about dog bites. And he said, and he wasn't really a dog person. He didn't even like dogs. But he said, the worst bites that I see are from pet dogs. And we have data to show this as well. The worst bites in terms of numbers and in terms of severity is from pet dogs. It's not from street dogs. And his assessment of it was very interesting. It was so bang on without any understanding of dog behavior. He said a street dog at most will jump on you, but will maybe scratch you, but run away. And they have that option, agency, right? They have the option to run away, whereas pet dogs don't have that option. They are stuck. They are stuck in within the four walls of your house, and that's why this escalates. So I think there are lots of lessons to learn there in terms of the role of agency and freedom and the option to walk away when it comes to dogs that feel the need to escalate to a bite. But for free living dogs, the other thing is we have shaped them, right? If they start biting, we have very low tolerance for them. So we, as a species, we get rid of any animal that causes any kind of inconvenience to us. So they have learned over tens of thousands of years that the way to exist and survive is to have no conflict with this particular species. Instead, we collaborate with this particular species. That's how we survive. And so they have all these ways in which they have evolved to look cute to us, to look endearing to us. For instance, if you take the way they feed themselves, people think that dogs are predators. They're not. They are scavengers and they are beggars, and they don't. They know how to beg for food, and they're so effective at that, which we all know. We have seen that. We've seen the dogs next to our dining tables and just somehow managing to convince even the best of us, you want to give me that food. You really want to give me that food. And if you look at the social structure, it's a very interesting one that you bring up. I was talking to one of the scientists here, and I said, canids are pack animals. And she said, not all canids are pack animals, and dogs are very unique in that while wolves form very stable packs, dogs, on the other hand, form very loose groups. They're very fluid groups. And so dogs, for instance, when they go looking for food, wolves will go as a pack to look for their food because they hunt together. Whereas dogs, when they go looking for food, they go in small numbers, maybe one or two of them at most, because a single dog approaching a person who is near an eatery, a bakery, or an abattoir, and a single dog that approaches with big eyes that says, I'm so cute, and puts his ears out, can convince this person to give them food, whereas a pack of dogs approaching can really make them afraid and really have the opposite effect. So their social structure is an interesting one in that when they look for food, they tend to do it just one or two dogs at a time. When they're scavenging as well, they do it one or two dogs at a time. But when they're sleeping, they can sleep together in larger groups because there's safety in numbers, and one or the other dog can stay up and be on the lookout and alert them if there's a problem. So sleeping usually tends to happen with multiple dogs sleeping in proximity, not necessarily all huddled together. So they're not like a tight-knit group. It's a bit more loose, and they're in small groups slightly away from each other, but within earshot of each other, so they can alert each other. And so that's and they're highly social in that they make friends with groups maybe one or two streets away. My dogs here have I make fun that she has two boyfriends down, to the southwest, and then one boyfriend to the east here. And then she goes and, spends time with them, one day with this boyfriend, one day with that boyfriend. And that's just me having fun. But these dogs are almost like 500 meters away. One is, I think, almost a kilometer away, and they come to visit them. This evening, we had two of them coming and visiting my dogs. They come and visit them. They spend time with each other, and they go back. And as social beings, we also need to understand that this way of having freedom of movement and engaging with each other in play, in jest, also plays a huge role in emotional regulation. So if they have been dysregulated because of something else, being in the company of other conspecifics to help them co-regulate helps them calm themselves down and go back to sleep and pump in some of those good hormones in them. And so that's the complex web that they have created for themselves. That is the social complexity that they have, that's going on for them.
Yeah, I think the takeaway there is that dogs are, of course, highly adaptive to the environment, and that works for them many times. But I think we can say it works against them when we take them out of an environment that they've grown accustomed to or they've gotten used to, and we change that dramatically because now they have to adapt to that new, more harsh environment. And what I was thinking of here is, culturally, or depending on where you are in the world and how most of the dogs are treated by, let's just say, the general public, so people walking around the street, it's gonna impact their behavior quite a bit. And I think of, if you travel around and you travel to different countries, you go to more touristy areas, the dogs are, the free living dogs, they're very smart about working the tourists. They know how to give those big eyes, like you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
and the chances of aggression, or seeing the aggression, or I should say in my observations, even at very low levels that most people wouldn't notice, whether it's a certain signal that they say, I need a little distance here, it's with such less frequency I see it, versus some other places where maybe the dogs are looked on as sort of more of a nuisance in some countries, or they're not viewed as the same type of sentient being as they are in some other countries. And so it really does argue the point that, okay, if we take these dogs and put them in a harsher environment, meaning confinement, lack of agency, lack of choices, stressful change, and especially we're going to assume more competition over resources because they don't get to just go scavenge whatever they want for the day, you're going to see significant, profound changes, and that's going to end up getting passed on. And we'll talk about how that happens too in just a moment. But, really makes you take a step back and say, why would we do that? Why would we put these dogs in a new environment where they have to adapt, but in a negative way, right? It speaks, it's so counterintuitive when you really think about it,
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And it's a new environment, but it's also a very disorienting environment because they're social beings. So they ground themselves with what's familiar around them. They are territorial beings. It's much like us. If you just transplant a person from place A to place B without free will, just remove them and toss them in a completely new environment. I mean, those of us who have moved to a new country, for instance, have experienced this, right? It is just so disorienting. And so that also causes a lot of dysregulation and confusion. And that in itself can really increase conflict risk. But on top of that, if there is added competition, they haven't figured out what their food sources are from, that further stresses them out. And because they're territorial, if you put them, that's the other thing that I see. Even people with pet dogs make this mistake, right? Of you take a dog into a dog park with completely new dogs and then expect that somehow they're just going to get along with all of them. That's not the way social beings work. They need time there are processes, there is kind of a social protocol that is followed for them to get to know each other, meet and greet each other, and understand the roles that different individuals play in their life, and navigate that social space, and figure out, where do I belong in the social fabric, and how do I navigate the social fabric? Which dog do I not approach? Which are the buttons of this dog that I do not press? This dog is sensitive around this, and I'm not going to press the button. So that takes a certain amount of learning and time, and not giving space for that, I think, can lead to miscommunication, which translates to growling, and we see all of that as one bucket, right? Just aggression. But it's not as simple as that. And I think it's just not fair to not see that social complexity with these animals, while we seem to completely create room for that for ourselves. We understand that with ourselves, but that's their struggle too.
Yeah, it's an analogy I try to remind people of all the time when they're looking at, quote unquote, rescuing dogs from another country and bringing them into another place that they think is going to be much better environment for them. But sometimes it's much worse because of the restrictions that society places on dogs. And you have to think about these dogs that are, if they're getting round up and put into these mass shelters, just how much stress that is. But a lot of people don't realize what that feels like, or they don't think about what that might feel like for the dogs when they could just put themselves in that shoes, and most people can easily recognize, whoa, this is like somebody just scoops me up and puts me somewhere foreign with a bunch of people I don't know, and I don't know where my next meal is going to come from, or what's going to happen day to day. And we're talking about the dogs that have been rounded up, right? So we'll talk about the dogs that didn't, that witnessed all of this in just a moment. But, you think about the dogs that are in those shelters, the cumulative stress or the distress, and then how that not only impacts their behavior, but their health, right? So we know the chronic issues with distress or chronic stress, how that impacts their health and their immunity. And again, when they're talking about, the issue of diseases and pandemics, and then you add in these layers that make it potentially more likely, right? So for these health issues to occur, and there's just so many things, and that's just the dogs that they were able to capture, right?
Yeah. And this is the thing, right? So their idea seems to be, especially in the court in India, their idea seems to be, we'll put them in shelters and get them adopted. But what they don't seem to see is exactly what you're pointing out. Once you remove them from where they're at and you move them into shelters, the environment that you put them in is so distressing and so stressful that these dogs can get completely dysregulated, and they can turn into biting dogs, in quote unquote. But it's not really, we know that that's not what it is. They're dogs that are struggling to cope with what we have done to them. And so nobody really wants to adopt them at this point anymore, because they're biting dogs. Who wants to take them home? And even if they do, we don't have the necessary education to explain, this is what has happened. This is the kind of space that they need. This is the time that they need to recuperate. So here's a dog that has gotten picked up from the road, put in a horrible environment, moved to a home by somebody who thinks that they're this dog's knight in shining armor, right? So they come and say, okay, I'd like to do this thing for this dog. I'd like to pick up the dog and take the dog home. And now they're feeling extremely offended by this, because this dog has turned around and started biting the rescuer, right? Whoever has rescued this dog. And so they take it very personally, they get very upset with it. And then what happens? We all know what happens to dogs like this. There's no happy ending here at all. And it's not just the dog, right? The price that is often paid is by the most vulnerable. So the ones that are likely to get bitten are the children in the house. And so here is a decision that has been taken by 3 people sitting at the highest court of the country. And the ones who are paying the price are the most vulnerable of our society, our children and our animals. It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I'm assuming the statistics are similar there, and the demographic or the age of humans that get bitten the most, 5 to 9-year-old boys in the US anyways, but I'm sure it's similar there. And that also needs to be considered as a consideration for safety for our children and our seniors, right? They're the second most bitten demographic. So, and that's born out of a lot of times the environment that we subject the dogs to. So we talked about the dogs that were or potentially could be captured, but then you have the dogs that are not, or the dogs sort of, I don't want to say left behind, but the dogs that didn't get into the hands of the folks trying to round them up. Oftentimes, you're going to see dogs that are proficient escape artists. So they're going to be more like, okay, because let's face it, dogs learn through many different ways, but they're also good observational learners, right? So they see something, they see another dog getting around, and they're like, whoa, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I saw what happened there, so I'm going to do my best to avoid the next person that looks like this in their uniform or whatever. And so over time, you're selecting for the dogs that are better escape artists, that probably are more fearful, right? Or they're able to use behaviors to get themselves out of that situation. So basically, what can happen over the long run is you're selecting for these dogs that are the ones we would want to maybe not have as prevalent. The whole issue in the first place is biting risk, right? So you're actually creating more potential biters by the dogs observing this. Like, this is how I get myself out of the situation. That's just one of the many reasons, right? So talk on that, and then we'll get into like things like in utero and then other types of learning that can happen. But let's just talk about that one thing first, like just the observational aspect.
Yeah. And dogs are excellent learners, highly adaptable, like you mentioned, and they are social learners. So they benefit a lot from observing other members of their society and learning from them. And so if they are observing this species, that is the human species, turning violent against their own kind, the dog kind, they will learn to be wary of us. And where there is fear, there is conflict. And this is true in both directions, right? Humans fear dogs, and that's why there is violence towards dogs. And dogs start fearing humans, and that's why there is going to be conflict with humans and bite risk. Add to that, these are, like you said, the ones that don't get captured are like, this is we see this report all the time. The dogs that are getting captured in the last few months that we're seeing are all the friendly ones, the friendliest, nicest ones, the ones who look at humans and come running towards them to say hi. And those are the ones that are getting captured. Those are the ones we want to keep with us.
Exactly.
Because also, one of the things that we also know is that dogs are territorial animals. And that's also why we talk about ABC, is when we do birth control and we stabilize the population. So in my neighborhood, the dogs that are in here are the ones that keep new dogs out. So they keep this area consistent, the population of this area consistent. I don't have to do additional work towards that. And the healthier I get them to be, the friendlier I get them to be, the more likely they're going to keep this population very stable. Those are the dogs that you're removing, and the ones that remain back are the ones who are absolutely terrified, are completely wary of humans to start with, and self-fulfilling prophecy. I was afraid of humans, and humans proved me right. They are terrible, and this is really a recipe for disaster.
Yes. And then those dogs start having puppies, right? Because they've got to feel that ecological need of the population. And so in utero stress, and that's been researched as well and studied, is what could be passed down to the puppies. So you want to just talk briefly on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are multiple studies that talk about this. There is epigenetics that comes into play. There is maternal fear and stress that comes into play. And so I think there have been studies that have been done on rats, which show that if you induce, for instance, a fear of a certain odor in the mother, the babies that are born have the same fear, of an odor, of a synthetic odor, right? Like if a synthetic odor can get passed down like that, there's a lot more that can get passed down. And so you're creating a whole new population, shaping the population now. It's not about individual dogs anymore. You're shaping entire populations to be fearful. Yeah.
And so and for those that may not have that side of aggression that thought process kind of worked out in terms of the epigenetics and what can happen there is that in a sense, you're priming these dogs to be more likely to be defensive because that is what they need to do to survive, or what they're primed to do to survive through either learning or through epigenetics or combination of through the environment. And you think about, you see dogs in some countries, for instance, the average public will throw stones at them because they look at dogs, as like vermin or not. The culture of liking dogs is not very high in some of those countries. So you see the dogs start to take on this defensiveness through, again, observation. I'm sure it's passed down through generations. And what happens is you develop this population of dogs that you're going to more likely see a bite because I tell people all the time, aggression is normal. It's just normal aspect of all species when it comes to defense and keeping ourselves safe and alive. So if we want to see more bites, just threaten the dogs more in any way we try to as humans or stumble into as humans, right? So
it's remarkable, right? We seem to, as a species, we seem to understand, we seem to justify our aggression. When somebody comes at us, we are allowed to defend ourselves in court to say, hey, this aggression was part of self-defense. We understand that very well, that we can make an argument in court saying this aggression was a result of self-defense. But when it comes to animals, we are almost taken by complete surprise and shock when we see the same thing from them. And we don't seem to understand that when you threaten an animal, the animal will try to defend themselves. And that does not look like a signed petition. That is going to have teeth and snarling and fangs and claws involved. Yeah. That is all they have going for themselves. But it seems like we take it very personally to say, no, this seems to be an offensive action against me, without recognizing that this is a defensive action by the animal.
Yeah. It's, it makes you think of that saying, a dog is a man's best friend. But then you think about it, it's that there's no worse enemy for some dogs than the modern man, right? Yeah. And it's just, the biases that many humans have, and the misconceptions and all these myths and everything really surrounding this issue. So much of it is, the resulting, what's happening as a result speaks such loud volumes about, the problem we can cause as humans for other animals. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have been doing a lot of work with on-ground communities where and I'm not going to dismiss the fact that there are dogs that bite humans who have not necessarily threatened them. So that does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. And we have to take cognizance of it. And we've been doing a lot of on-ground work with entering these communities to figure out what's going on and how do we resolve it. And it gets very interesting, right? Because we don't have the option of training them. So what is it that we can do? And we find that understanding dog behavior and just modifying the environment a little bit can do great wonders. For instance, this is something that was a very simple thing that one of the premier institutes in India has a very nice place called the Dog Lab in Kolkata, where they study free-living dogs, exclusively free-living dogs, and they have multiple doctorate students coming out of there with this expertise. And I was talking to the scientist there, the head of the lab there, and she said, we have done the mapping of the dogs, and we realized that dogs rest close to where they eat. And so if you move the feeding points away from busy areas, a lot of the bites are a result of a startle response. So, it's important that we do not go too close to an eating dog or a sleeping dog. And so if we move their feeding areas to quieter areas, sort of cul-de-sacs, end of the road or an open park, or you make sure that it's not in a narrow alleyway, a staircase, a landing and things like that. You move the feeding areas, the resting areas automatically move. And that in itself gives us extraordinary success. Like we managed to get rid of 80% of the bites by simply moving the feeding area. Another one that we do is break up the group and feed them in multiple places. Like you said, decrease the perception of competition, because they're simple animals. Sometimes they perceive competition where there may be none. So if you feed too many dogs in the same area, it might be difficult. So break up the groups, feed them separately in different areas. And then another one, a very simple one that we do, is give them warm beds to sleep. A dog that is able to sleep is going to get enough sleep. A dog that is sleep deprived is again a dog that is likely to bite. So make sure they're getting enough sleep. Dogs need 14 to 16 hours of sleep a day. That's the beauty of the dog. That's the other study that Dr. Badra's lab did when they did an ethological study to see the breakdown of their activity budget, time activity budget, is that most dogs want to sleep most of the day. That's really all they want to do. The Coppingers, Dr. Coppinger has written a great book on the dogs, right? And he says wolves evolved to travel great distances to look for foods, while dogs evolved to stay in one place and wait for the garbage and the food to arrive, right? And that's what they do well. They just want to sleep for 10 hours and wait for you to get done with your meal and then throw out what's remaining, and we will eat it and we'll go back to sleep. And if we understand that and we can enable that, it makes such a big difference. 90% of the bites, 95% of the bites, we can just broad strokes, we can get rid of them, and then really look at the few anomalies that they have. There will always be anomalies, and see if those dogs really need to be removed, rehomed, whether they don't do well on the streets. Maybe they are really meant to be in a more caring environment, and so they really need to be moved into a home, in the presence of experts maybe. But that number really drops down to something that is very, very manageable then. And so understanding dog behavior is so critical in a situation like this, understanding their ethograms and ethology.
I think in that, with that in mind, also for me, that the understanding that dog bites are so infrequent and happens so much less than other types of common injuries. It's, again, the hysteria and the misconceptions and the biases that people have, because it's I guess, a creature with teeth, right? And so people have these perceptions, but you don't see mass hysteria like in the US about balloons or slippers or 5-gallon buckets, right? Or swimming pools, things that cause far more injuries statistically to children and to adults in many cases than dog bites, far, far more. Yeah. And, but you never hear about like, oh, we've got to ban balloons. We can never have balloons anymore. We got to throw those all away and round them all up and get rid of them all, right? Yeah. Or swimming pools. We can't have people swimming anymore because they might drown or these bad things can happen. Yeah. It's just, when you think about so for me, and kind of segueing off that, for me, it's about education, right? You teach kids, hey, when you're blowing up a balloon, be careful, or, don't, you're walking down the stairs, don't wear loose slippers, right? You learn how to swim, you take precautions. And so I find, again, traveling around, you see the public's interaction with dogs in some places. Like in the US, I will say there's a lack of education about how to interact with dogs. People you hear it all the time, kids running up, or even adults running up to dogs, like, oh, I love dogs, and then petting dogs that they don't know. Whereas some places you go, there's a profound respect, right? So the dogs could be sleeping right on the sidewalk. Yeah. And then people and the kids, they know, they've been brought up, just let sleeping dogs lie. They walk around, or they even just step over the dog that's sleeping on the sidewalk. Yeah. And the dogs all know that, hey, nobody's going to bother me, because the vast majority of people don't try to reach down and pet me while I'm sleeping. So with that in mind, don't you think it would be, in terms of the resources spent on these kind of issues, should go towards the education, right? Educating the public, and of course all the other things you mentioned to put in place, relocation of certain things, and setting the environment for success, right? Yeah. But in terms of the educational component, you see profound differences depending on where you are in the world and how people interact with dogs. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think education is so critical, and it's such low-hanging fruit because it's not complicated education here. I've been, in the last few months, I've also been doing a lot of college programs, and the lessons are not that hard. And India, I mean, this is what breaks my heart, right? India has been a country where many of us have known historically, ancestrally, we have learned how to deal with animals, and that knowledge is slowly getting lost in urban India, which is, I think, part of the problem why we are here. Because I live in a rural area, and the other day I was out in a little shop close by, and the lady there's a little dog that came up. It's a little tuck shop, she sells some cookies and some vegetables and whatnot. And so as soon as I went there, the dog came up there to me, and I said hi, and I tried to pet the dog, and she's like, no, 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 don't pet the dog. That's a street dog, it'll bite. Now, clearly, she has very little understanding of dog behavior. She has very little affection for them. But she knows how to keep herself safe, which is she's not panicking about this dog. This dog obviously has made it a habit to show up at that shop every time there are people there to buy something. But she has learned that, okay, the way to keep myself safe is just don't touch the animal. So basics go like this. If you don't know how to deal with them, if you are not unsure how to deal with them, just don't touch them. And we talk about curving, which is, walk in a wide curve around them with your shoulders slightly turned away from them, sort of avoiding them. So if there's a dog on the right side of the road, you cross over to the left side of the road and you walk away from them. Talking about basics about don't approach an eating animal, sleeping animal, injured animal, or a lactating mother. These are golden rules. My grandfather was a farmer, and we would be allowed to go run on the farm. And in India, we're going to have snakes and peacocks and mongooses and whatnot. And we were not protected from all of that. And we were just told, okay, kids, you can go play, but just don't do this. Don't poke, prod. And if there's an animal that's sleeping, eating, with babies or injured, they are high bite risk, high conflict risk. So don't go near them. Don't approach them. And then the other last aspect of it is if an animal comes charging at you, stay very, very still. Don't make extreme eye contact, be a tree, right? Like, don't avoid eye contact, tuck in your limbs, protect your neck, and be very still. That's it. That's all there is to it, right? That is the bulk of the lesson there. We can make posters of this and stick it on every school, every hospital at a fraction of the budget that they're talking about, and we would reduce bites by a huge degree. But that is the sensible thing to do. And it seems like we live in a climate where sensible things are generally disregarded.
You think? Yeah, I'm only like half joking, but we need to bring back shaming for people that get bitten, in the sense that, you see like these videos, somebody in Yellowstone Park, they approach a bison and they get, knocked out, or they get hurt by a bison or a bear or something. And everybody in the comments usually jumps to, what was that person thinking? What an idiot. They should have never gone up.
Yeah.
And that's normal. People see that. But when you think about it, why don't we just do the same with dogs? Like, why are you going up to that sleeping dog and trying to pet it or do something to it while it's, it's the same kind of concept. Like, you're going up to an animal that could potentially harm you if it's not interested in you, just like the bison or the bear. And it's just like, well, going up to a dog and you got bitten should be considered. Sometimes it's the humans, shouldn't be doing what they're doing. But I digress.
And with dogs, right, it's really interesting is that unlike most animals, they have a very high tolerance for proximity.
Yes.
So unlike most other animals where you cannot dream of being in the same space with them, dogs tolerate so much. I've seen people hug them and literally stick their fingers in their ears and whatnot, like things you should not be doing with any living being. You try that with your friend and your friend is going to snap at you and not want to be your friend anymore. But they do all kinds of things, and there's such a high degree of tolerance for this. And if we don't, and there's a reason they have this high degree of tolerance, is that they want to coexist around us and they play a very critical role in our ecosystem. This is something we shouldn't forget. And so they are really a gift to humankind because they are tolerating our nonsense while still protecting us and saving us and cleaning our environment and keeping it safe. And they're alerters. They alert us from other animals, other intruders, people who shouldn't be in the neighborhood, so on and so forth. They're protectors. So one of the submissions that was done in court was a very moving submission. This judge, this lawyer has done years of work and has written a book about orphaned children on the roads of India, which is just a really difficult topic to talk about. And she talks about how dogs are their only line of defense. These free living dogs are the only line of defense. Just like, don't take that away from them. They have nothing going for them. They live on the streets by themselves. And you'll see the same of many, many women who come out and say that, India is not a safe place for women. We're not very proud of, the kind of country we are, especially towards women. And many of us, and I speak for myself too, feel safer on the streets at night because these dogs exist. They are a gift to us and they tolerate us and they still give to us. And despite all this, we seem to not want to see this. We're a remarkable species.
Yes. So, on this note of what we kind of been talking about, what humans can do, but what can we do? And the professionals maybe listen to this podcast as well. What can be done to help with this issue and to really steer things back in the right direction here?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a constantly evolving situation. Since August, there's new things being thrown at us all the time. So depending on when you hear this, the situation may have changed. So the first and most critical thing is exactly what you're doing, what your listeners are doing, which is start paying attention to this. Don't look away. Don't ignore it as something that's happening in another part of the world. Just the fact that you're informed and you're staying on top of this, you're aware of how this scene is unfolding, I think is one of the biggest and most critical and important things. I tell everybody, don't take your eyes off us. We are fighting this. We are fighting this for many reasons. There's also a meta fight here, right? Which is that of privilege and things like that. So don't take your eyes off us. Many of us are writing about this. My own school, we have blogs. We are on social media and we've put most of our other marketing aside, and this is what we've been focusing on. So please follow us and stay on top of what we're trying to say and read the articles. Go through the whole thing. Don't just skim over it. The devil is in the details, really here. And our ask also keeps changing based on how the situation is unraveling. So you'll understand more of it, and maybe you will find something that you can help with at that moment that you can give to us. So that is going to continue. It has been critical for us right from the beginning, and it will continue to remain critical. And I think this is true for any cause that touches your heart. I think you have to stay on top of it, right? And stick with it, right? Don't abandon the cause. Stick with it. It's happening in another part of the world that you don't understand. So it's easy to forget and get caught, but stick with it. We will stick with you. You stick with us, kind of a thing. The second thing is you are loud voices within your own countries, especially professionals. So you can lend your voice to escalate this to organizations, animal welfare organizations within your own country, to put out statements condemning what the court is doing, condemning not just the animal abuse, but also the public health crisis that they are creating. Organizations that speak up make a very big difference. So any statements that they put out will make a big difference to us. And you can either tag our school so we can amplify it, or tag the Supreme Court directly, tag the government of India directly. That will make a huge difference to us. You can also reach out to professional organizations, sort of for dog professionals, to see. We have got a few already, especially from the UK. We have got a few who have put out statements supporting us. So any statement of that kind, me reaching out to a lot of these organizations, I'm just somebody from India, they're not going to pay attention. But when you reach out, it makes such a big difference. So that is something that will really help us. And then lastly, just reaching out to us every once in a while, those of us who are fighting and feel like we're fighting a losing battle completely, reaching out to us, just tell us, you've got this, keep going. I think that also makes a difference, Yeah.
Yes. Well, certainly can't speak for everybody in the Bitey End of the Dog audience, but I am sure you have lots of support from the listeners that are listening right now. And I implore everybody who is listening to go out and share this information and talk about this situation, because, Sindhoor has just touched upon there's so many issues. There's so many, the impacts on not only dogs, but humans in India and beyond, because we were talking earlier about how this could become almost contagious thinking, and which is, of course, damaging in so many ways. So, Sindhoor, any other last thoughts you want to put out to the world?
Yeah. So, in response to what the court has done, while the court is still deliberating on this, people have started taking matters into their own hands, which is leading to very, very gruesome stuff, right? And I don't want to get into too many details, because I know we all have sensitive hearts, and I really don't want to upset your day. But the kind of ways, in my neighboring state alone, 1,000 dogs in the last 2 weeks have been killed in brutal ways, including burying and burning them alive. And so this is really a very urgent matter for us. And that's why I'm here. That's why, Mike, I requested you that, I want to talk to your audience. And I've sort of putting myself out there, talking to anybody who will, because while we argue and talk about the science of it and talk about the finance of it and the legality of it and so on and so forth, I think dogs are losing their lives in the most horrific manner. And I think that there's a sense of urgency because of that. And that's really what I'm reaching out for. And I also want to express that, for us who on ground and witnessing this is so difficult, that despite it being very much our battle, some days I wake up and I just want to be like, I don't want to think about this today. But so I can understand if people outside the country don't want to think about it, because I do recognize that all of you are fighting your own battles in your own countries, which is equally disturbing and really gotten all of us shook up. So given that, the fact that you stuck around till the end, listened to this, I think I have this overwhelming sense of gratitude in my heart for what you have given me. It means so much to me. And so I really want to say thank you. And I want to give you all a big virtual hug.
Well, we thank you, Sindhoor, absolutely, not only in this regard, but all the work you've done for dogs and humanity. So anything we can do to support, of course. And one last quick question is where to send people. So it's your site, and you mentioned tagging on social media, but is there any central website for more information that you want to send people to, or should I send them to Barks or?
Yeah, so our website, www.barks.com, we do have a tab there with details on removal of dogs, but our social media has more of it. We've now recently got on X as well, because apparently that's where you need to talk about this, but we're tend to be more active on Facebook and Instagram. And I do have a blog as well. It's called blog.barks.com, where we've written extensively detailed scientific articles. So all of these are spaces where we also have documented newspaper articles and other institutions that have written technical reports. So we've tried to collate all of that and present it. And
that is Barks, BHARCS.com.
Yes.
Barks.com. And I'll include those in the show notes for everybody listening in. Sindhoor, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for sharing this information with the world. I really appreciate everything you're doing, and we will stay in touch for sure. Yes, thank you so much for having me here. It means a lot to know that we are not alone in our part of the world, and yeah, I'm just out of words for this. Yeah, I feel so much gratitude. Thank you. Thank you.